Question 1. Comparative studies suggest that customer data is a valuable asset for service improvement, but its use must be carefully balanced with privacy rights. Imagine you are a data analyst at Deutsche Telekom, and you receive a request to analyze detailed customer call and internet usage patterns to identify potential areas for network optimization. A customer has expressed concern about their personal data being used for such analysis. Under German data protection regulations, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Review the customer's explicit consent and the terms of service they agreed to, and if the analysis can be performed on anonymized and aggregated data without identifying individuals, proceed with that approach. Option B. Assume that the general terms of service implicitly grant Deutsche Telekom permission to analyze all customer usage data for any business purpose, including detailed pattern analysis. Option C. Inform the customer that their data is being used for internal service improvement and that their concerns cannot be accommodated due to the necessity of data analysis. Option D. Proceed with analyzing the detailed customer usage data, as this is for internal service improvement and therefore acceptable under general business practices. Correct answer is A. Review the customer's explicit consent and the terms of service they agreed to, and if the analysis can be performed on anonymized and aggregated data without identifying individuals, proceed with that approach. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the complex interplay between customer privacy expectations and the legitimate business need for data analysis to improve service offerings. The challenge lies in identifying the precise boundaries of permissible data usage under German data protection law, specifically the GDPR, which is highly relevant for a company operating in Germany like Deutsche Telekom. Misinterpreting these boundaries can lead to significant legal penalties and reputational damage. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the customer's explicit consent and the specific terms of service they agreed to. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation enshrined in Article 5 of the GDPR. Deutsche Telekom, as a data controller, must demonstrate a lawful basis for processing personal data, which in this case would likely be consent or legitimate interest, carefully balanced against the data subject's rights. Analyzing the anonymized and aggregated data, ensuring no individual can be identified, is crucial for compliance. This approach prioritizes transparency and respect for individual privacy, while still allowing for valuable service improvement insights. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to proceed with analyzing the detailed, non-anonymized customer usage data without obtaining explicit, informed consent for this specific purpose. This directly violates Article 6 of the GDPR, which mandates a lawful basis for processing, and Article 7, which sets strict conditions for consent. It also infringes upon the data subject's right to privacy and control over their personal data. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that general terms of service automatically grant permission for any form of data analysis, even if it involves detailed individual usage patterns. This disregards the principle of specificity required for consent and the need for clear, understandable information about data processing activities, as outlined in Articles 12 and 13 of the GDPR. The data subject must be aware of what data is being collected, why, and how it will be used. A third incorrect approach would be to dismiss the customer's concern outright, arguing that the data is for internal improvement and therefore acceptable. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of data protection principles and the rights of data subjects. It fails to acknowledge that even for internal purposes, data processing must be lawful and respect privacy rights. This approach could lead to a breach of trust and potential legal action. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a risk-based approach. First, they must identify the specific data in question and the intended use. Second, they should consult internal legal and compliance teams to understand the precise requirements of the GDPR and any relevant German data protection laws. Third, they should assess the level of consent obtained and whether it covers the intended analysis. If consent is insufficient or unclear, the professional should seek to obtain explicit, informed consent for the specific processing activity. If that is not feasible, they should explore anonymization and aggregation techniques that render the data non-personal, thereby falling outside the scope of GDPR. Transparency with the customer about data usage, even if anonymized, is also a best practice. Question 2. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual spike in outbound data traffic from a critical customer database server, coinciding with a series of failed login attempts from an unknown IP address. This suggests a potential unauthorized access attempt or a data exfiltration event. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the Deutsche Telekom security operations team? Option A. Immediately shut down all external network access for the entire Deutsche Telekom infrastructure to prevent any potential spread of the intrusion. Option B. Contact the customer whose data is stored on the server to inform them of a potential security incident before taking any other action. Option C. Immediately isolate the affected server from the network to prevent further data exfiltration and initiate a forensic investigation to determine the scope and nature of the breach, while simultaneously preparing for regulatory notification. Option D. Attempt to block the suspicious IP address at the firewall and monitor for further activity, assuming the failed logins indicate a brute force attack that may not have succeeded. The correct answer is C. Immediately isolate the affected server from the network to prevent further data exfiltration and initiate a forensic investigation to determine the scope and nature of the breach, while simultaneously preparing for regulatory notification. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for a significant security breach impacting customer data and Deutsche Telekom's reputation. The urgency of the situation, coupled with the need to balance immediate response with thorough investigation and compliance, requires careful judgment. Missteps could lead to regulatory penalties, loss of customer trust, and operational disruption. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a multifaceted response that prioritizes containment, investigation, and regulatory compliance. This aligns with best professional practices for incident response, which emphasize a structured and documented process. Specifically, it involves isolating the affected systems to prevent further compromise, initiating a forensic investigation to understand the scope and cause, and immediately notifying the relevant regulatory bodies as mandated by data protection laws, e.g., GDPR if applicable to the data involved, or relevant German telecommunications regulations. This proactive and compliant approach minimizes damage and demonstrates accountability. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately shut down all network services without a targeted containment strategy. This is a failure of professional judgment because it could cause unnecessary disruption to legitimate customers and operations, potentially violating service-level agreements and customer rights. It also hinders the forensic investigation by destroying volatile evidence. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to fix the vulnerability without proper documentation or involving the security and legal teams. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It bypasses established incident response protocols, which are often designed to meet legal and regulatory requirements for breach notification and evidence preservation. Such an ad hoc fix could introduce new vulnerabilities or fail to fully address the root cause, leading to repeat incidents and non-compliance with reporting obligations. A third incorrect approach would be to delay reporting the incident to regulatory authorities, hoping it might resolve itself or go unnoticed. This is a direct violation of data protection and telecommunications regulations, which mandate timely notification of data breaches. Such a delay can result in severe penalties, reputational damage, and a loss of credibility with both regulators and customers. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a scenario should employ a structured incident response framework. This typically involves 1. Preparation, having an incident response plan in place. 2. Identification, recognizing and confirming the incident. 3. Containment, limiting the scope and impact. 4. Eradication, removing the cause of the incident. 5. Recovery, restoring systems to normal operation. 6. Lessons learned, documenting the incident and improving future responses. Crucially, throughout this process, legal and compliance teams must be engaged to ensure all regulatory obligations are met. Question 3. To address the challenge of launching innovative telecommunications services while ensuring strict adherence to German and EU regulatory frameworks, particularly concerning data protection and network security, which of the following strategies best exemplifies a compliant and ethically sound approach? Option A. Implement a comprehensive compliance framework that integrates regulatory requirements into the service design and development lifecycle, involving cross-functional teams from the outset and conducting thorough risk assessments before deployment. Option B. Utilize a static set of compliance guidelines and checklists that have been historically effective, without actively monitoring for changes in regulatory interpretations or technological advancements. Option C. Assign primary responsibility for regulatory compliance to a dedicated legal department, expecting them to review and approve services with minimal direct involvement from the engineering and product development teams. Option D. Prioritize rapid market entry by launching new services and addressing any potential compliance issues or regulatory concerns only after the service has been widely adopted by customers. The correct answer is A. Implement a comprehensive compliance framework that integrates regulatory requirements into the service design and development lifecycle, involving cross-functional teams from the outset and conducting thorough risk assessments before deployment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between business objectives and the stringent requirements of regulatory compliance within the telecommunications sector. Deutsche Telekom, operating within the German and EU regulatory landscape, must navigate complex data protection laws, such as the GDPR and telecommunication-specific regulations. The pressure to innovate and deploy new services quickly can create tension with the need for thorough due diligence and risk assessment to ensure compliance. A failure to adequately address regulatory requirements can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and operational disruptions. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive and integrated strategy for regulatory compliance. This means embedding compliance considerations into the entire lifecycle of new service development, from initial concept to deployment and ongoing operation. It necessitates close collaboration between legal, compliance, engineering, and product development teams. This approach ensures that potential regulatory hurdles are identified and mitigated early, rather than being addressed as an afterthought. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of privacy by design and privacy by default, mandated by GDPR, and the broader regulatory expectation for robust risk management frameworks in critical infrastructure sectors. This ensures that the company not only avoids penalties, but also builds trust with customers and regulators by demonstrating a commitment to responsible innovation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves prioritizing speed to market above all else, with compliance checks performed only after a service has been launched. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It violates the principles of data protection by potentially exposing customer data to unauthorized access or misuse before adequate safeguards are in place. It also contravenes the spirit and letter of regulations that require risk assessments and compliance measures to be implemented before data processing or service deployment. This reactive approach significantly increases the likelihood of breaches, fines, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach is to delegate compliance responsibility solely to a separate, siloed compliance department without adequate integration with the development teams. While a dedicated compliance function is crucial, this approach fails because it can lead to a lack of understanding of the technical nuances of new services and a disconnect between compliance requirements and practical implementation. This can result in compliance policies that are either overly burdensome and impractical or insufficient to address the actual risks. It undermines the principle of shared responsibility for compliance and can lead to gaps in oversight and enforcement. A third incorrect approach is to rely on outdated compliance checklists that do not account for the evolving nature of technology and regulatory interpretations. Regulations, especially in rapidly advancing fields like telecommunications and data processing, are subject to interpretation and amendment. Using static, unupdated checklists can lead to a false sense of security, while actual compliance gaps remain unaddressed. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to adapt to the dynamic regulatory environment, which is a critical ethical and regulatory failing. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based, proactive, and collaborative approach to regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Understanding the specific regulatory obligations applicable to the service and the company's operations. 2. Conducting thorough impact assessments, e.g., data protection impact assessments, early in the development process. 3. Engaging cross-functional teams to ensure that compliance is integrated into design and development. 4. Establishing clear internal policies and procedures and ensuring they are regularly reviewed and updated. 5. Fostering a culture of compliance where all employees understand their role in upholding regulatory standards. 6. Implementing robust monitoring and auditing mechanisms to ensure ongoing adherence. Question 4. Implementation of a new AI-powered customer service chatbot that analyzes customer interaction history to personalize responses and predict future needs, without a prior comprehensive data protection impact assessment. Option A. Deploy the chatbot immediately to gain a competitive advantage, with plans to address any data privacy concerns retrospectively. Option B. Implement the chatbot using anonymized data only, assuming this negates the need for a formal privacy assessment. Option C. Conduct a full data protection impact assessment, DPIA, to identify and mitigate potential privacy risks before deployment. Option D. Proceed with the deployment after a brief internal review by the IT security team to ensure basic system integrity. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the deployment after a brief internal review by the IT security team to ensure basic system integrity. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between rapid technological deployment and the need for robust data protection, particularly within the context of telecommunications. Deutsche Telekom, as a major service provider, operates under strict regulatory frameworks governing data privacy and security. The challenge lies in balancing the business imperative to innovate and offer new services with the legal and ethical obligations to safeguard customer data. Careful judgment is required to ensure that new implementations do not inadvertently create vulnerabilities or violate privacy rights. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a proactive, risk-based assessment aligned with the principles of data protection by design and by default, as mandated by relevant German and EU data protection laws e.g., GDPR. This involves conducting a thorough data protection impact assessment, DPIA, before deployment. A DPIA systematically identifies potential privacy risks associated with the processing of personal data, evaluates their likelihood and impact, and outlines mitigation measures. This aligns with the regulatory requirement to implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure a level of security appropriate to the risk. It demonstrates a commitment to privacy as a fundamental right and a core business value, fostering customer trust and ensuring legal compliance. An incorrect approach that bypasses a formal risk assessment and proceeds with deployment without adequate safeguards represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to breaches of personal data, resulting in substantial fines under data protection laws, reputational damage, and loss of customer confidence. Specifically, it violates the principles of accountability and data protection by design. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on immediate business benefits without considering the downstream privacy implications, ignores the legal obligations to process data lawfully and fairly. This can result in the collection or use of data in ways that are not transparent to customers or are beyond the scope of their consent, leading to non-compliance with data minimization and purpose limitation principles. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify the core business objective and the data processing activities involved. 2. Consult relevant internal policies and external regulatory requirements, e.g., GDPR, German Federal Data Protection Act BDSG. 3. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment, including a DPIA if personal data is involved or if the processing is likely to result in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons. 4. Develop and implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to mitigate identified risks. 5. Obtain necessary legal and compliance approvals before deployment. 6. Establish ongoing monitoring and review mechanisms to ensure continued compliance and adapt to evolving risks. Question 5. The efficiency study reveals that a new data processing system offers significant performance improvements, but also collects and analyzes a broader range of customer metadata than previously handled. What is the most appropriate regulatory compliance step to take before deploying this system? Option A. Rely on existing internal data handling policies, as the new system operates within the same organizational framework. Option B. Proceed with the deployment, assuming the vendor's compliance certifications are sufficient to cover all data processing activities. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment (DPIA) to evaluate the risks to individual privacy and identify necessary safeguards. Option D. Implement the system immediately to leverage its efficiency gains and address any privacy concerns that arise post-deployment. Correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment (DPIA) to evaluate the risks to individual privacy and identify necessary safeguards. Explanation: the efficiency study reveals a potential conflict between a new, highly efficient data processing system and existing data privacy regulations. The challenge lies in balancing the drive for operational improvement with the stringent legal and ethical obligations to protect customer data. Deutsche Telekom, as a telecommunications provider, operates under strict data protection laws, particularly the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, if operating within the EU or equivalent national legislation. The professional challenge is to ensure that technological advancements do not inadvertently lead to non-compliance, which could result in significant fines, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough data protection impact assessment (DPIA) before full implementation. This aligns with the principles of data protection by design and by default mandated by regulations like the GDPR. A DPIA systematically identifies and mitigates risks to individuals' rights and freedoms concerning data processing. It ensures that privacy considerations are embedded into the system's architecture from the outset, rather than being an afterthought. This proactive stance is best professional practice as it demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and ethical data handling, safeguarding both the company and its customers. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the implementation without a DPIA, assuming the system's efficiency inherently implies compliance. This overlooks the specific requirements of data protection laws, which mandate risk assessment for new technologies processing personal data. Such an approach risks violating principles like data minimization, purpose limitation, and the right to privacy, leading to potential regulatory breaches. Another incorrect approach might be to rely solely on the vendor's assurances of compliance without independent verification. This abdicates responsibility and fails to meet the company's due diligence obligations under data protection frameworks. A third incorrect approach could be to implement the system and then attempt to retroactively address any privacy concerns. This reactive strategy is inefficient, costly, and significantly increases the risk of non-compliance during the interim period, exposing the company to greater legal and reputational harm. The professional decision-making process should involve a risk-based approach. When considering new technologies that process personal data, the first step should be to identify the potential privacy implications. This should trigger a formal assessment process, such as a DPIA, to understand the nature, scope, context, and purposes of the processing. The findings of this assessment should then inform the decision on whether and how to proceed with implementation, ensuring that appropriate safeguards are in place to mitigate identified risks and achieve compliance with all applicable data protection laws and ethical standards. Question 6. The audit findings indicate that the company's revenue recognition process has been subject to significant manual overrides and a lack of segregation of duties, leading to a heightened risk of misstatement. The audit team has identified specific instances where revenue was recognized prematurely. Considering the potential impact on the financial statements and the need to gather sufficient appropriate audit evidence, which of the following approaches best addresses this situation? Option A. Conclude that the potential misstatement is immaterial based on the initial assessment of the financial statement impact, and proceed with the audit without further investigation into the control weaknesses. Option B. Focus solely on the financial impact of the identified premature revenue recognition, adjusting the financial statements accordingly, and deeming the internal control assessment complete. Option C. Rely on management's assurances that the identified issues have been rectified and that future revenue recognition will be compliant, without performing further independent verification. Option D. Perform detailed substantive testing of revenue transactions for the entire period, focusing on the specific instances of premature recognition identified, and evaluate the effectiveness of any compensating controls implemented by management. The correct answer is D. Perform detailed substantive testing of revenue transactions for the entire period, focusing on the specific instances of premature recognition identified, and evaluate the effectiveness of any compensating controls implemented by management. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential misstatement in the financial statements due to inadequate internal controls over revenue recognition. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the auditor to exercise significant professional skepticism and judgment in evaluating the effectiveness of controls and the potential impact on the financial statements. The auditor must balance the need for thoroughness with the practical constraints of an audit. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the principles of risk-based auditing and the requirements of auditing standards. Specifically, it involves understanding the client's business and its internal control environment to identify areas of higher risk. By performing detailed testing of the identified control weaknesses, the auditor can gather sufficient appropriate audit evidence to determine whether the misstatement is material. This approach is ethically sound as it prioritizes the accuracy and reliability of financial reporting. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the financial impact without assessing the underlying control deficiencies is professionally unacceptable. This fails to address the root cause of the potential misstatement and may lead to an incomplete audit. It also neglects the auditor's responsibility to evaluate internal controls, a key component of audit planning and execution. Another incorrect approach that involves accepting management's assertions without corroborating evidence is a failure of professional skepticism. Auditors are not merely passive observers. They must actively seek evidence to support or refute management's representations. This approach risks overlooking material misstatements and failing to comply with auditing standards that mandate independent verification. A further incorrect approach that involves prematurely concluding the audit without sufficient evidence to support the audit opinion is a direct violation of auditing standards. This demonstrates a lack of due professional care and could lead to an unqualified audit opinion on materially misstated financial statements, which is a serious ethical and professional failing. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. 1. Understand the business and its internal control environment. 2. Identify and assess risks of material misstatement, considering control weaknesses. 3. Design and perform audit procedures to gather sufficient appropriate audit evidence, focusing on areas of higher risk. 4. Evaluate the evidence obtained and form an opinion on the financial statements. 5. Document all procedures performed and conclusions reached. Question 7. Consider a scenario where Deutsche Telekom is developing a new cloud-based communication service that will collect and process user metadata, including call logs and location data, to offer personalized features. The product development team is under pressure to meet aggressive launch deadlines. Which of the following approaches best ensures regulatory compliance and ethical data handling? Option A. Rely on a generic, pre-existing compliance checklist that has been used for previous product launches, without a specific assessment of the new service's unique data processing activities. Option B. Assign the primary responsibility for ensuring compliance to the marketing department, trusting their understanding of customer needs to guide data handling practices. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment, DPIA, involving legal and compliance teams to identify and mitigate privacy risks before launch, and integrate privacy by design principles into the service architecture. Option D. Proceed with the launch as scheduled, assuming that any minor compliance issues can be rectified after the service is live and generating revenue. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment, DPIA, involving legal and compliance teams to identify and mitigate privacy risks before launch, and integrate privacy by design principles into the service architecture. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between business objectives and regulatory obligations. Deutsche Telekom, like any telecommunications provider, operates in a highly regulated environment. The pressure to launch new services quickly to maintain market competitiveness can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential compliance risks. Navigating this requires a delicate balance, ensuring that innovation does not come at the expense of adhering to the strict legal and ethical frameworks governing data privacy and consumer protection. The challenge lies in proactively identifying and mitigating these risks before they manifest as breaches or violations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a proactive and integrated strategy for regulatory compliance. By embedding compliance considerations into the early stages of product development, Deutsche Telekom demonstrates a commitment to responsible innovation. This involves conducting thorough data protection impact assessments, DPIA, as mandated by relevant data protection regulations, e.g., GDPR if the exam jurisdiction implies EU/Germany. These assessments systematically identify potential privacy risks associated with the new service and outline mitigation strategies. Furthermore, consulting with legal and compliance teams ensures that the service design aligns with all applicable laws and internal policies. This approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to regulatory requirements, thereby safeguarding customer data, maintaining trust, and avoiding significant legal and financial penalties. It aligns with the principle of privacy by design and privacy by default, which are cornerstones of modern data protection law. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed to market above all else, assuming that any compliance issues can be addressed post-launch. This approach is professionally unacceptable because it demonstrates a disregard for regulatory obligations and a failure to conduct due diligence. It significantly increases the risk of data breaches, privacy violations, and subsequent regulatory fines and reputational damage. Such a stance suggests a reactive rather than a proactive compliance culture, which is inherently flawed in a regulated industry. Another incorrect approach would be to delegate the entire responsibility for compliance to the marketing team without adequate legal or technical oversight. A marketing plays a crucial role in product launch. They may not possess the specialized knowledge required to interpret and apply complex regulatory frameworks related to data handling and privacy. This delegation without proper support or expertise can lead to unintentional noncompliance, as the team might overlook critical requirements or misinterpret legal obligations. It fails to establish a robust internal control environment for regulatory adherence. A third incorrect approach would be to conduct a superficial review of compliance requirements, relying on outdated checklists or assumptions without a thorough assessment of the specific data processing activities of the new service. This superficiality is dangerous because it creates a false sense of security. Regulatory landscapes evolve, and new services often introduce novel data processing methods. Perfunctory review is unlikely to uncover the nuanced risks associated with the service, leaving Deutsche Telekom vulnerable to violations. It signifies a lack of diligence and a failure to engage with the substance of regulatory requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals in regulated industries must adopt a risk-based approach to decision-making. This involves identifying potential risks, assessing their likelihood and impact, and implementing appropriate controls. When launching new products or services, a structured process should be followed. 1. Risk identification. Proactively identify all potential regulatory and ethical risks associated with the new service. 2. Impact assessment. Evaluate the potential consequences of these risks, including legal penalties, reputational damage, and customer harm. 3. Mitigation planning. Develop and implement strategies to reduce or eliminate identified risks. 4. Stakeholder consultation. Engage relevant internal departments, legal, compliance, IT, security, and potentially external experts to ensure comprehensive coverage. 5. Continuous monitoring. Establish mechanisms for ongoing monitoring and review of compliance post-launch. This systematic approach ensures that business objectives are pursued responsibly and in full accordance with legal and ethical standards. Question 8. The investigation demonstrates that a Deutsche Telekom employee, in an attempt to expedite a customer service request, shared a customer's personal data with an unauthorized third party via an unencrypted email. This action, while not intended to cause harm, has violated internal data handling policies and potentially German data protection regulations. Which of the following actions best represents the most appropriate and compliant response for Deutsche Telekom to take in this situation? Option A. Conduct a thorough internal investigation to determine the exact nature and scope of the data shared. Assess the risk to the customer. Notify the relevant German data protection authority and the affected customer as required by law, and implement enhanced data protection training for all employees. Option B. Issue a formal warning to the employee and instruct them to be more careful in the future, while assuring customers that no significant data breach has occurred. Option C. Blame the customer for providing information that led to the data being shared and require them to sign a waiver absolving Deutsche Telekom of any responsibility. Option D. Immediately terminate the employee's contract and issue a public statement acknowledging a minor data mishandling incident without further details. The correct answer is D. Immediately terminate the employee's contract and issue a public statement acknowledging a minor data mishandling incident without further details. Explanation: the investigation demonstrates a scenario where a Deutsche Telekom employee, acting in their official capacity, has inadvertently shared sensitive customer data with an external party due to a lapse in adherence to internal data protection protocols. This situation is professionally challenging because it involves a direct conflict between operational efficiency and the paramount legal and ethical obligations regarding customer data privacy. The employee's intent was not malicious, but the outcome poses significant risks to customer trust, regulatory compliance, and the company's reputation. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for swift remediation with a thorough understanding of the root cause and the appropriate disciplinary and corrective actions. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive and compliant response. This involves immediately containing the breach, notifying affected parties and regulatory bodies as mandated by relevant German data protection laws, e.g., GDPR as implemented in Germany, and the German Federal Data Protection Act (BDSG), and conducting a thorough internal investigation to identify systemic weaknesses. The focus on retraining and reinforcing data protection policies ensures that such incidents are prevented in the future, demonstrating a commitment to ongoing compliance and customer safeguarding. This aligns with the principles of accountability and due diligence expected of telecommunications companies operating under strict regulatory oversight. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate disciplinary action without a thorough investigation fails to address the underlying causes of the breach, potentially leading to recurring issues. This represents an ethical failure in due diligence and a regulatory failure to implement adequate technical and organizational measures to ensure data protection. Another incorrect approach that involves downplaying the incident or delaying notification to regulatory authorities constitutes a direct violation of reporting obligations under data protection laws, leading to potential fines and severe reputational damage. This demonstrates a lack of integrity and a disregard for legal requirements. A third incorrect approach that involves blaming the customer for the data exposure, even if they inadvertently facilitated it, is ethically unsound and a failure to uphold the company's responsibility to protect customer data, potentially leading to legal repercussions and a complete erosion of customer trust. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with immediate incident response and containment, followed by a detailed root cause analysis. This analysis should inform corrective actions, which may include policy revisions, enhanced training, and technological safeguards. Transparency with affected parties and regulatory bodies, in accordance with legal timelines and requirements, is crucial. Finally, a commitment to continuous improvement in data protection practices should be embedded within the organizational culture. Question 9. Upon reviewing the integration of a new generative AI model for customer service chatbots, which approach to risk assessment best aligns with current best practices and anticipated regulatory scrutiny for Deutsche Telekom? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that specifically analyzes the AI model's potential for bias, its explainability, data privacy implications, and emergent behaviors, using scenario-based planning to anticipate future risks. Option B. Rely primarily on the historical risk assessment data generated for previous non-AI customer service technologies, assuming similar risk profiles. Option C. Delegate the entire risk assessment process to the IT security team, focusing solely on cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Option D. Adopt a reactive approach, addressing any identified AI-related issues only after they have impacted customers or the business. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that specifically analyzes the AI model's potential for bias, its explainability, data privacy implications, and emergent behaviors, using scenario-based planning to anticipate future risks. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent uncertainty in predicting the impact of emerging technologies on existing risk frameworks. The rapid evolution of AI, particularly in areas like data analysis and customer interaction, necessitates a proactive and adaptable approach to risk assessment. Simply relying on historical data or established methodologies without considering the unique characteristics of AI introduces a significant blind spot. The pressure to innovate and leverage new technologies can sometimes overshadow the need for thorough risk evaluation, creating a tension between business objectives and prudent risk management. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a forward-looking, scenario-based risk assessment that specifically considers the unique attributes of AI. This aligns with best professional practice by acknowledging that AI introduces novel risks not fully captured by traditional methods. For instance, AI's potential for bias, lack of transparency, black box problem, and emergent behaviors requires dedicated analysis. This approach is ethically and regulatorily sound as it demonstrates due diligence in identifying and mitigating potential harms, thereby protecting customers, the company, and its reputation. It anticipates future regulatory expectations, which increasingly focus on responsible AI deployment. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on historical risk assessment data for traditional IT systems. This fails to account for the fundamental differences in how AI operates, such as its learning capabilities and potential for unintended consequences. This approach is regulatorily deficient as it does not meet the standard of care expected when implementing novel technologies, potentially violating principles of data protection and consumer rights if AI-driven decisions are flawed due to unassessed risks. Ethically, it represents a failure to protect stakeholders from foreseeable harm. Another incorrect approach is to delegate the entire AI risk assessment to the IT department without broader business and legal input. While IT has technical expertise, AI risk extends beyond technical vulnerabilities to include ethical, legal, and reputational dimensions. This siloed approach is professionally unsound because it neglects the interdisciplinary nature of AI risk management. It can lead to regulatory noncompliance if legal and ethical considerations are overlooked, and it fails to adequately address the business impact of AI-related risks. A third incorrect approach is to adopt a wait-and-see attitude, only addressing risks as they materialize. This reactive stance is professionally negligent and ethically irresponsible when dealing with potentially impactful technologies like AI. It ignores the proactive obligations of risk management and can lead to significant financial, reputational, and legal damage once issues arise. Regulators increasingly expect organizations to anticipate and mitigate risks, not merely react to them. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a dynamic and comprehensive risk assessment framework for AI. This involves 1. Identifying AI-specific risks, bias, explainability, security, ethical implications. 2. Employing scenario planning to explore potential future impacts. 3. Fostering cross-functional collaboration involving IT, legal, compliance, ethics, and business units. 4. Continuously monitoring and updating risk assessments as AI technology evolves and its use cases expand. 5. Integrating ethical considerations and principles of responsible AI development and deployment into the core risk management process. Question 10. Governance review demonstrates a potential gap in the oversight of third-party data access protocols, raising concerns about data security. Which of the following is the most appropriate next step to address this finding? Option A. Request a full audit of all third-party vendors without any prior analysis of the specific concern raised by the governance review. Option B. Acknowledge the finding but defer any action until a more significant data breach incident occurs to validate the risk. Option C. Immediately implement a blanket ban on all third-party data access until a new, comprehensive policy can be drafted. Option D. Initiate a detailed risk assessment to understand the likelihood and potential impact of unauthorized data access by third parties, considering existing controls and potential mitigation strategies. The correct answer is D. Initiate a detailed risk assessment to understand the likelihood and potential impact of unauthorized data access by third parties, considering existing controls and potential mitigation strategies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for proactive risk identification with the practical constraints of resource allocation and the potential for over-analysis. Governance review has highlighted a potential weakness, but the exact nature and severity of the risk are not yet fully understood. A hasty or overly simplistic approach could lead to misallocation of resources, focusing on minor issues while neglecting significant threats, or conversely, causing undue alarm and disruption. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it advocates for a structured, evidence-based methodology to assess the identified risk. This aligns with principles of sound risk management, which emphasize understanding the likelihood and impact of potential events before implementing mitigation strategies. By seeking to quantify the potential impact and likelihood, and by considering existing controls, this approach ensures that resources are directed towards the most critical risks. This is ethically sound as it promotes efficient and effective use of company resources, and professionally responsible as it adheres to established risk management frameworks, often implicitly or explicitly required by regulatory bodies overseeing telecommunications companies, ensuring the company's resilience and operational integrity. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate, visible symptoms without understanding the root cause or potential impact would be professionally unacceptable. This fails to address the underlying issue and could lead to ineffective or temporary solutions. It represents a regulatory failure by not conducting a thorough risk assessment, as often mandated by telecommunications regulations that require robust operational risk management. Another incorrect approach that involves immediately escalating the issue to the highest levels without any preliminary analysis would be professionally unsound. This creates unnecessary panic and diverts senior management attention from strategic issues without providing them with sufficient information to make informed decisions. It is an ethical failure due to the potential for creating a culture of overreaction and a regulatory failure by not following a defined risk assessment process. A third incorrect approach that dismisses the finding due to a lack of immediate, quantifiable evidence would also be professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a failure to appreciate the potential for emerging risks and can lead to significant unforeseen consequences. It is a significant regulatory and ethical failure, as it neglects a governance directive and potentially exposes the company to unmanaged risks, violating the duty of care owed to stakeholders. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a phased approach. First, understand the nature of the identified concern. Second, gather preliminary information to assess its potential significance. Third, conduct a more detailed risk assessment if warranted, focusing on likelihood and impact. And finally, develop and implement appropriate mitigation strategies based on the assessment findings. This iterative process ensures that risk management efforts are proportionate, effective, and aligned with the company's overall strategic objectives and regulatory obligations. Question 11. Examination of the data shows that a new, innovative telecommunications service is nearing its launch date. The development team is eager to release the service to gain a competitive advantage, but concerns have been raised about potential operational disruptions and data security vulnerabilities that have not been fully quantified. The current risk assessment process has been largely superficial, focusing on immediate technical challenges rather than a comprehensive evaluation of all potential risks. Which of the following approaches to risk assessment best aligns with regulatory expectations and professional best practices for a company like Deutsche Telekom? Option A. Defer a detailed risk assessment until after the service has been launched and initial customer feedback is received, allowing for a more practical understanding of the risks encountered in a live environment. Option B. Implement a phased risk assessment process that begins with initial concept development and continues through testing, deployment, and post-launch monitoring, involving input from all relevant departments and focusing on a broad spectrum of potential risks including operational, security, legal, and market factors. Option C. Conduct a rapid, high-level risk assessment focused solely on the most obvious technical security flaws, with the understanding that the primary goal is to meet the launch deadline. Option D. Rely on the development team's technical expertise to identify and mitigate any emergent risks during the initial launch phase, assuming that most issues will be minor and can be addressed quickly post-release. Correct answer is B. Implement a phased risk assessment process that begins with initial concept development and continues through testing, deployment, and post-launch monitoring, involving input from all relevant departments and focusing on a broad spectrum of potential risks including operational, security, legal, and market factors. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for rapid innovation and market responsiveness with the imperative to maintain robust risk management practices. The pressure to launch new services quickly can lead to shortcuts in the risk assessment process, potentially exposing Deutsche Telekom to significant financial, operational, and reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to ensure that risk assessment is not merely a procedural hurdle, but an integral part of the development lifecycle. The correct approach, which involves a multi-stage risk assessment integrated throughout the product development lifecycle, represents best professional practice. This aligns with regulatory expectations for telecommunications companies to proactively identify, assess, and mitigate risks associated with new technologies and services. Specifically, it reflects principles of sound governance and operational resilience, ensuring that potential threats are understood and managed before they materialize. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining customer trust and regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness in risk assessment would fail to adequately identify and address potential vulnerabilities. This could lead to regulatory breaches, such as non-compliance with data protection laws or service availability requirements, resulting in fines and sanctions. Ethically, it represents a failure to protect customer interests and maintain the integrity of the service. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on technical risks while neglecting market or strategic risks, would be incomplete. This oversight could lead to significant financial losses if the service fails to gain market traction or if competitive pressures are underestimated, even if technically sound. A third incorrect approach, relying solely on historical data without considering the unique aspects of the new service, would be insufficient. New technologies often introduce novel risks that are not reflected in past incidents, making a purely retrospective analysis inadequate for future proofing. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework. This framework should mandate the identification of risks at each stage of development, from conception to deployment and ongoing operation. It should encourage cross-functional collaboration, bringing together technical, legal, compliance, and business teams to provide diverse perspectives. Furthermore, it should emphasize the importance of documenting the risk assessment process and the rationale behind mitigation strategies, ensuring accountability and facilitating future reviews. A commitment to continuous improvement, where lessons learned from risk assessments are fed back into the process, is also vital. Question 12. Performance analysis shows a sudden, albeit minor, dip in a key operational metric for a critical system. The dip is not yet outside of historical acceptable variance but is noticeable. What is the most appropriate initial step to manage this situation? Option A. Immediately escalate the issue to senior management, requesting a full system audit and a halt to all non-essential operations until the cause is identified. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive review of the system's architecture and all associated processes to identify potential vulnerabilities and implement immediate, broad-based security enhancements. Option C. Document the performance dip in the risk register as a minor observation and continue monitoring the metric without further immediate action. Option D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the specific data points and contributing factors surrounding the performance dip, seeking to understand its root cause before considering any remediation actions. The correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive review of the system's architecture and all associated processes to identify potential vulnerabilities and implement immediate, broad-based security enhancements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for timely risk mitigation with the potential for overreaction and unnecessary disruption. The performance analysis is a signal, not a definitive conclusion, and acting solely on a single, potentially anomalous data point without further investigation could lead to misallocation of resources and damage to operational efficiency. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate level of response. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured, multi-stage risk assessment process. This aligns with best professional practice and regulatory expectations for robust risk management. It begins with validating the data and understanding the context of the performance dip. Subsequently, it involves identifying potential root causes, assessing the likelihood and impact of each, and then developing proportionate mitigation strategies. This systematic approach ensures that actions taken are evidence-based, targeted, and efficient, minimizing the risk of unintended consequences. This aligns with principles of good corporate governance and operational resilience, which are implicitly expected in any regulated financial environment, even if specific regulations are not explicitly cited for this exam. The focus is on a proactive and analytical response rather than a reactive one. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately implement broad, disruptive controls based solely on the initial performance dip. This represents a failure in due diligence and proportionate response. It assumes the performance dip is a critical, unmitigated risk without proper investigation, potentially leading to unnecessary costs, operational friction, and employee frustration. This approach lacks the analytical rigor expected in risk management and could be seen as an overreaction, failing to adhere to principles of efficiency and effectiveness. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the performance dip entirely without any further investigation. This is a failure to acknowledge potential emerging risks. Even if the dip is later found to be an anomaly, a responsible professional should at least conduct a preliminary review to confirm this. Ignoring such signals, even if they seem minor, can lead to missed opportunities for improvement or the escalation of underlying issues that could develop into more significant problems. This approach demonstrates a lack of proactive risk awareness and a failure to uphold the duty of care. A third incorrect approach is to delegate the entire problem to a different department without providing clear context or oversight. While collaboration is important, abdicating responsibility without a proper handover or understanding of the initial findings is a failure in accountability. It risks the problem being misunderstood, mishandled, or lost in translation, and it fails to ensure a cohesive and effective risk management strategy. This approach undermines the integrated nature of risk management within an organization. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by adopting a structured problem-solving framework. First, gather and validate all relevant information. Second, analyze the information to identify potential causes and their implications. Third, assess the severity and likelihood of identified risks. Fourth, develop and implement proportionate and effective mitigation strategies. Finally, monitor the effectiveness of implemented strategies and adjust as necessary. This iterative process ensures that decisions are informed, actions are appropriate, and risks are managed effectively and efficiently. Question 13. The evaluation methodology shows a need to assess potential risks to a new cloud-based customer data management system. Given the evolving nature of cyber threats and the potential for unforeseen operational disruptions, which risk assessment approach would best ensure comprehensive and compliant oversight? Option A. Utilizing a purely quantitative risk assessment that relies solely on historical financial loss data to assign monetary values to identified risks. Option B. Adopting a qualitative risk assessment that relies exclusively on expert opinion to identify and rank risks without structured data analysis. Option C. Implementing a checklist-based risk assessment that focuses on compliance with a predefined set of security controls without considering emergent threats. Option D. Employing a scenario-based risk assessment that incorporates both historical incident data and forward-looking threat intelligence to model potential future events and their impact. Correct answer is D. Employing a scenario-based risk assessment that incorporates both historical incident data and forward-looking threat intelligence to model potential future events and their impact. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of risk assessment methodologies within the specific context of Deutsche Telekom's operational environment, as governed by relevant German and EU regulations. The challenge lies in selecting the most appropriate risk assessment approach when faced with incomplete or potentially outdated information, necessitating a judgment call that balances thoroughness with practicality. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a forward-looking, dynamic assessment that considers emerging threats and vulnerabilities. This aligns with regulatory expectations for robust risk management frameworks that are not static, but adapt to the evolving threat landscape. Specifically, it reflects a commitment to proactive identification and mitigation, which is a cornerstone of data protection and cybersecurity regulations like the GDPR, emphasizing the need for ongoing risk evaluation. An incorrect approach that relies solely on historical data without considering future trends fails to meet regulatory requirements for a comprehensive risk assessment. Such an approach could lead to underestimation of future risks, leaving the organization exposed to potential breaches or operational disruptions, and violating the principle of proportionality and due diligence mandated by regulations. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on easily quantifiable risks ignores qualitative but significant threats, such as reputational damage or strategic vulnerabilities, which are also crucial components of a holistic risk assessment and are implicitly covered by broader compliance obligations. An approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy. For instance, by using a superficial checklist without deeper analysis, risks overlooking critical control gaps and failing to provide a true picture of the organization's risk posture, thereby contravening the spirit and letter of regulatory compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the scope and objectives of the risk assessment. This involves understanding the specific assets, processes, and potential threats relevant to Deutsche Telekom. Next, they should identify and evaluate potential risk assessment methodologies, considering their strengths, weaknesses, and applicability to the given context. The selection process should involve weighing the methodology's ability to identify a broad spectrum of risks, both quantitative and qualitative, its adaptability to changing circumstances, and its alignment with regulatory expectations. Finally, professionals must critically assess the output of the chosen methodology, ensuring it provides actionable insights for risk mitigation and informed strategic decision-making, rather than simply fulfilling a procedural requirement. Question 14. Analysis of how Deutsche Telekom should approach the risk assessment for integrating a novel quantum-resistant encryption protocol into its core network infrastructure, considering potential impacts on data integrity and service availability. Option A. Conduct a comprehensive threat modeling exercise specifically for the quantum-resistant protocol, evaluate its integration impact on existing systems and data privacy, and establish a continuous monitoring and reassessment plan. Option B. Prioritize the potential performance enhancements of the quantum-resistant protocol, conducting only a superficial risk assessment to avoid delaying its adoption. Option C. Defer a detailed risk assessment until the quantum-resistant protocol has been deployed and its performance is observed in a live production environment. Option D. Rely primarily on risk assessments conducted for previous, unrelated encryption technologies, assuming similar threat profiles. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive threat modeling exercise specifically for the quantum-resistant protocol, evaluate its integration impact on existing systems and data privacy, and establish a continuous monitoring and reassessment plan. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent uncertainty in predicting the impact of emerging technologies on a telecommunications infrastructure. Deutsche Telekom operates in a highly regulated environment, and a failure to adequately assess and mitigate risks associated with new technologies could lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and operational disruptions. The challenge lies in balancing innovation and the adoption of potentially beneficial technologies with the imperative to maintain service reliability, data security, and compliance with German and EU telecommunications regulations. The rapid evolution of technology means that traditional risk assessment methods may not fully capture the novel threats and vulnerabilities introduced by these advancements. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive and adaptive risk assessment methodology that integrates technical, operational, and regulatory considerations. This includes conducting thorough threat modeling specific to the new technology, evaluating potential impacts on existing systems and data privacy, and developing robust mitigation strategies. Crucially, it requires continuous monitoring and reassessment as the technology matures and its usage patterns evolve. This aligns with the principles of risk management embedded in German telecommunications law, e.g., Telekommunikationsgesetz (TKG), and EU regulations like the NIS Directive, Network and Information Security Directive, which mandate a high level of security and resilience for critical infrastructure. A forward-looking approach that anticipates potential issues before they materialize is considered best professional practice. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on historical risk data from similar, but not identical, technologies. This fails to account for the unique characteristics and potential vulnerabilities of the new technology, leading to an incomplete risk profile and inadequate mitigation plans. This could violate the principle of due diligence required by regulatory bodies, potentially resulting in noncompliance with security standards. Another incorrect approach is to defer risk assessment until after the technology has been fully implemented and is in widespread use. This reactive stance is professionally unacceptable as it significantly increases the likelihood of encountering unforeseen issues, potentially causing service outages, data breaches, or security incidents. Such a failure to implement preventative measures would be a direct contravention of the proactive security obligations stipulated in relevant regulations. A third incorrect approach is to focus exclusively on the potential benefits of the new technology without a commensurate effort to identify and assess its associated risks. While innovation is encouraged, it must be balanced with a comprehensive understanding of potential downsides. An unbalanced assessment neglects the duty of care to customers and stakeholders and could lead to regulatory scrutiny for failing to uphold security and reliability standards. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured and iterative risk management framework. This involves 1. Defining the scope of the assessment, clearly identifying the technology and its intended use. 2. Identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities, considering both technical and human factors. 3. Analyzing the likelihood and impact of identified risks. 4. Evaluating existing controls and developing new mitigation strategies. 5. Implementing and monitoring the effectiveness of these strategies. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment as circumstances change. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, compliant, and aligned with the organization's strategic objectives and regulatory obligations. Question 15. Operational review demonstrates that while current cybersecurity measures are robust against known threats, there is a growing concern within the industry regarding novel, sophisticated attack vectors that are still in early stages of development and have not yet been widely exploited. These emerging threats are often discussed in specialized forums and research papers, but their direct impact on Deutsche Telekom's specific infrastructure is not yet definitively quantifiable. Which of the following approaches to risk assessment is most appropriate in this situation? Option A. Conduct a thorough, albeit qualitative, assessment of these emerging threats, considering expert opinions, industry trends, and potential impact scenarios to inform a tiered response strategy. Option B. Defer any significant action regarding these novel threats until they become more prevalent and their impact can be empirically measured, at which point a reactive defense strategy will be implemented. Option C. Focus exclusively on mitigating current, well-understood threats, as resources are finite and investments should be directed towards risks with demonstrable impact and probability. Option D. Prioritize the allocation of significant resources to develop defenses against these novel attack vectors, even with limited quantifiable data, based on their potential for high impact and the need for proactive defense. The correct answer is D. Prioritize the allocation of significant resources to develop defenses against these novel attack vectors, even with limited quantifiable data, based on their potential for high impact and the need for proactive defense. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient risk mitigation with the potential for overregulation or misallocation of resources. The core difficulty lies in accurately assessing the likelihood and impact of emerging threats without succumbing to panic or neglecting less visible but still significant risks. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between genuine, high-priority risks and those that are speculative or have a low potential impact. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the principles of a robust and proportionate risk management framework, as expected within the regulatory environment governing telecommunications in Germany, e.g., Bundesnetzagentur regulations, IT-Sicherheitsgesetz. This approach emphasizes a data-driven, evidence-based assessment that considers both the probability and potential impact of identified risks. It prioritizes resources towards the most critical threats, ensuring that the company's operational resilience and customer data are adequately protected. This systematic and analytical method is ethically sound as it demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to safeguarding stakeholders' interests. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the most sensational or widely publicized emerging threats, without a thorough assessment of their specific relevance and potential impact on Deutsche Telekom's operations, is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to a misallocation of resources, diverting attention and budget from more immediate or probable risks that could cause significant disruption or financial loss. Such an approach fails to meet the regulatory expectation of a comprehensive and proportionate risk assessment, potentially exposing the company to unforeseen vulnerabilities. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few individuals without a structured risk assessment process is also professionally unsound. This bypasses the necessary due diligence and objective analysis, leading to potentially biased or incomplete risk profiles. It neglects the ethical obligation to make informed decisions based on reliable data and established methodologies. Finally, an approach that dismisses emerging threats entirely due to a lack of immediate quantifiable evidence is also flawed. While a rigorous assessment is necessary, a complete disregard for potential future risks, especially in a rapidly evolving technological landscape, demonstrates a lack of foresight and a failure to uphold the duty of care expected of a responsible telecommunications provider. This can lead to a reactive rather than proactive risk management posture, which is often more costly and damaging in the long run. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This typically includes identifying potential threats, analyzing their likelihood and impact, evaluating existing controls, determining residual risk, and developing mitigation strategies. It requires continuous monitoring and review, adapting the assessment as the threat landscape evolves. Professionals should always seek to base their decisions on objective data, expert analysis, and a clear understanding of regulatory expectations and ethical responsibilities. Question 16. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a large dataset of customer interaction logs, containing details of service requests and feedback, could yield valuable insights for improving Deutsche Telekom's customer support services. However, the data includes personal information that, if not handled appropriately, could lead to privacy breaches. Which of the following approaches best balances the need for data-driven service improvement with the stringent data protection requirements mandated by German and EU regulations? Option A. Process the raw, identifiable customer interaction logs directly, as the potential improvements to customer service are significant enough to justify the risk of incidental data exposure. Option B. Discard the entire dataset of customer interaction logs due to the presence of personal information, to completely avoid any potential privacy risks, even if it means foregoing opportunities for service improvement. Option C. Anonymize the customer interaction logs to a degree that prevents any possibility of re-identifying individuals, and then use the anonymized data for analysis to identify patterns and areas for service enhancement. Option D. Pseudonymize the customer interaction logs and use them for exploratory analysis, assuming that the insights gained will be beneficial, without a clearly defined purpose for the pseudonymization or strict controls on re-identification keys. The correct answer is C. Anonymize the customer interaction logs to a degree that prevents any possibility of re-identifying individuals, and then use the anonymized data for analysis to identify patterns and areas for service enhancement. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between maintaining data privacy and the business imperative to leverage data for service improvement. The challenge lies in balancing regulatory compliance with operational efficiency and innovation. Deutsche Telekom, operating within Germany and the EU, is bound by stringent data protection laws, primarily the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. Navigating these regulations requires a nuanced understanding of data anonymization, pseudonymization, and the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation. The risk assessment highlights a potential breach of these principles if data is not handled with sufficient care. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes the principle of data minimization and purpose limitation, core tenets of GDPR. By anonymizing the data to a degree that prevents re-identification of individuals, the company adheres to Article 5 of the GDPR, which mandates that personal data shall be adequate, relevant, and not excessive in relation to the purposes for which they are processed. Furthermore, anonymization ensures that the data is no longer considered personal data, thereby falling outside the direct scope of GDPR consent and processing requirements for personal data, while still allowing for valuable analysis. This approach demonstrates a commitment to privacy by design and by default, a key requirement under Article 25 of the GDPR. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves using pseudonymized data without a clear, documented, and justifiable purpose for the pseudonymization itself, and without ensuring that the re-identification key is securely stored and access is strictly controlled. Pseudonymized data is still considered personal data under GDPR, and its processing requires a lawful basis. If the purpose is simply to explore potential improvements without a defined scope or objective, it could violate the Purpose Limitation Principle Article 5(1)(b) GDPR. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with the analysis using raw, identifiable customer data, arguing that the insights gained will significantly improve customer service. This directly violates Article 5(1)(a) of the GDPR, which requires personal data to be processed lawfully, fairly, and transparently, and Article 6, which mandates a lawful basis for processing. Without explicit consent or another valid legal basis, processing identifiable data for this purpose would be illegal. A third incorrect approach is to discard the data entirely, citing privacy concerns without exploring any compliant methods for data utilization. While prioritizing privacy is essential, an absolute refusal to use any form of data for improvement might be overly cautious and could hinder legitimate business objectives, potentially missing opportunities to enhance customer experience in ways that do not compromise privacy. A more balanced approach, as outlined in the correct option, would be more professionally sound. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach that prioritizes compliance with applicable regulations, in this case, GDPR. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the data involved and its sensitivity. 2. Determining the specific business objective for using the data. 3. Assessing the legal basis for processing under GDPR. 4. Evaluating technical and organizational measures to protect data privacy, such as anonymization or pseudonymization. 5. Documenting the entire process, including the rationale for data handling choices and the safeguards implemented. This systematic approach ensures that business objectives are pursued responsibly and ethically within the bounds of the law. Question 17. Research into the most effective and compliant methods for anonymizing customer usage data to facilitate network performance analysis and service improvement, considering the stringent requirements of the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and best practices for data minimization and privacy preservation within a telecommunications provider. Option A. Implement a multi-stage anonymization process involving pseudonymization of direct identifiers, aggregation of usage patterns, and a strict data retention policy, with clear internal guidelines on data access and usage for service improvement purposes. Option B. Utilize the anonymized data for marketing purposes and customer profiling, in addition to network performance analysis, without obtaining explicit customer consent for these expanded uses. Option C. Remove only direct personal identifiers such as names and addresses from the dataset before analysis. Option D. Share the dataset, after removing direct identifiers, with external analytics partners without conducting thorough due diligence on their data security and privacy protocols. The correct answer is A. Implement a multi-stage anonymization process involving pseudonymization of direct identifiers, aggregation of usage patterns, and a strict data retention policy, with clear internal guidelines on data access and usage for service improvement purposes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge in navigating the ethical and regulatory landscape of data handling within a telecommunications context, specifically concerning customer privacy and the responsible use of anonymized data for service improvement. The core difficulty lies in balancing the potential benefits of data analysis for service enhancement against the imperative to protect individual privacy, even when data is ostensibly anonymized. Deutsche Telekom operates under strict German and EU data protection regulations, primarily the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any data processing, even for anonymized purposes, adheres to the principles of lawfulness, fairness, transparency, purpose limitation, data minimization, accuracy, storage limitation, integrity, and confidentiality. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a robust, multi-layered anonymization process that includes pseudonymization and aggregation, coupled with a clear, documented policy for data usage and retention. This aligns with GDPR emphasis on data protection by design and by default. Pseudonymization, while not full anonymization, significantly reduces the risk of re-identification. Aggregation further obscures individual data points. A clear policy ensures transparency and accountability, demonstrating a commitment to ethical data stewardship and compliance with Article 5 of the GDPR, which outlines the principles relating to the processing of personal data. This approach minimizes the risk of accidental re-identification and ensures that the data used for service improvement is genuinely delinked from individuals, thereby respecting their fundamental right to privacy, as enshrined in Article 8 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the removal of direct identifiers like names and addresses is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the GDPR definition of anonymization, as indirect identifiers, e.g., location data, usage patterns, can often be combined to re-identify individuals, especially with access to external datasets. This constitutes a failure of data minimization and integrity principles under Article 5 of the GDPR, and potentially a breach of Article 6 concerning lawful processing, as the processing might not have a legitimate basis if re-identification is possible. Another incorrect approach that involves sharing the anonymized data with third-party analytics firms without a rigorous vetting process or contractual safeguards regarding their data handling practices is also professionally unacceptable. This exposes Deutsche Telekom to significant regulatory risk and potential reputational damage. It violates the principle of accountability under Article 5(2) of the GDPR and could lead to unauthorized processing or breaches by the third party, making Deutsche Telekom liable. Furthermore, it fails to ensure adequate security measures as required by Article 32 of the GDPR. A third incorrect approach that involves using the anonymized data for purposes beyond the initial stated goal of service improvement, without explicit consent or a clear legal basis, is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This violates the principle of purpose limitation under Article 5(1)(b) of the GDPR, which mandates that personal data should be collected for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes and not further processed in a manner that is incompatible with those purposes. It also undermines transparency and trust with customers. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a risk-based approach. First, clearly define the purpose of data processing and the specific data required. Second, implement technical and organizational measures to protect personal data, prioritizing anonymization techniques that are robust and verifiable. Third, conduct a data protection impact assessment (DPIA) if the processing is likely to result in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons, as mandated by Article 35 of the GDPR. Fourth, establish clear data governance policies, including retention periods and access controls. Fifth, ensure transparency with customers about data usage. Finally, regularly review and update data protection practices to align with evolving legal requirements and technological advancements. Question 18. The assessment process reveals that a marketing team requires access to customer interaction data to identify trends for a new campaign. The data contains names, contact details, and purchase history. The team proposes to analyze this data to understand customer preferences. Which of the following approaches best balances the analytical needs with data protection requirements under the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR? Option A. Pseudonymize the customer interaction data by replacing direct identifiers with artificial identifiers and clearly define the specific analytical purpose for the campaign. Option B. Anonymize the data by removing all personal identifiers in a way that is easily reversible, allowing for potential future re-identification. Option C. Proceed with the analysis using the raw, identifiable customer interaction data, assuming the insights gained will benefit the company and customers. Option D. Delete all personal identifiers from the data, rendering it impossible to link back to any individual, and then proceed with the analysis. The correct answer is A. Pseudonymize the customer interaction data by replacing direct identifiers with artificial identifiers and clearly define the specific analytical purpose for the campaign. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in data privacy, balancing the need for comprehensive internal analysis with the strict requirements of data protection regulations. Deutsche Telekom operates within the framework of the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, in the European Union. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of what constitutes personal data, the lawful basis for processing it, and the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation. Simply anonymizing data is not always sufficient if re-identification is still possible, and the purpose of processing must be clearly defined and adhered to. The correct approach, which involves pseudonymizing the data and clearly defining the analytical purpose, represents best professional practice under GDPR. Pseudonymization, as defined by Article 4.5 of GDPR, is a form of processing personal data such that it can no longer be attributed to a specific data subject without the use of additional information, provided that such additional information is kept separately and is subject to technical and organizational measures to ensure that the personal data are not attributed to an identified or identifiable natural person. This aligns with the principle of data minimization, Article 5.1c, and purpose limitation, Article 5.1b, as it reduces the risk to data subjects while still allowing for meaningful analysis. The clear definition of the analytical purpose ensures compliance with purpose limitation. An incorrect approach that involves completely deleting all personal identifiers without any form of pseudonymization or anonymization that meets GDPR standards for irreversibility would be a regulatory failure. While it might seem to protect data, it could render the analysis impossible and might not be the most proportionate measure if pseudonymization could achieve the analytical goals. Another incorrect approach, which is to proceed with the analysis using the raw, identifiable personal data, constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This directly violates Article 5.1a of GDPR, which mandates that personal data shall be processed lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner, and Article 6, which requires a lawful basis for processing. It also breaches the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, and potentially the security principle Article 5.1f, if adequate safeguards are not in place. A third incorrect approach, which is to anonymize the data in a way that is easily reversible or where re-identification is still feasible, fails to meet the GDPR definition of anonymization, and thus continues to process personal data without a lawful basis or adequate safeguards, leading to regulatory noncompliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the data's nature, identifying applicable regulations, in this case, GDPR, determining the lawful basis for processing, and applying data protection principles like minimization, purpose limitation, and security. This involves a risk-based approach, assessing the potential harm to data subjects, and implementing the least intrusive yet effective measures to achieve the legitimate business objective. Consulting with data protection officers and legal counsel is crucial when in doubt. Question 19. Stakeholder feedback indicates a strong desire to reduce operational expenditures in the IT department, specifically by deferring non-critical cybersecurity software updates for a period of 6 months to reallocate budget towards new feature development. As a cybersecurity manager at Deutsche Telekom, how should you best address this request, considering the regulatory landscape and the company's commitment to data protection? Option A. Inform stakeholders that cybersecurity is non-negotiable and refuse any discussion of deferring updates, regardless of their perceived criticality. Option B. Propose a detailed risk assessment of the proposed deferral, identifying specific vulnerabilities and their potential impact, and explore alternative cost-saving measures that do not compromise essential security protocols, presenting a balanced recommendation to management. Option C. Immediately approve the deferral of all non-critical cybersecurity updates to demonstrate responsiveness to stakeholder feedback and contribute to immediate cost savings. Option D. Recommend deferring all cybersecurity updates, including critical ones, for the specified period, arguing that the risk is minimal given the current threat landscape. The correct answer is B. Propose a detailed risk assessment of the proposed deferral, identifying specific vulnerabilities and their potential impact, and explore alternative cost-saving measures that do not compromise essential security protocols, presenting a balanced recommendation to management. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between immediate cost-saving pressures and the long-term strategic imperative of maintaining robust cybersecurity. Deutsche Telekom, as a major telecommunications provider, operates within a highly regulated environment where data protection and network security are paramount. The challenge lies in balancing the need for efficient resource allocation with the non-negotiable requirement to adhere to stringent German and EU data protection laws, such as the GDPR and specific telecommunications regulations. A hasty decision to deprioritize cybersecurity updates based solely on short-term budget constraints could lead to significant regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and a loss of customer trust, all of which have far greater long-term financial implications than the initial savings. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive risk assessment and a data-driven decision-making process. This involves evaluating the potential impact of cybersecurity vulnerabilities against the cost of mitigation. By seeking to understand the specific risks associated with the proposed deprioritization and exploring alternative solutions that do not compromise security, the professional demonstrates adherence to the principle of proportionality and due diligence mandated by regulatory frameworks. This proactive and informed stance ensures that decisions are aligned with legal obligations, ethical responsibilities, and the company's long-term strategic interests, thereby safeguarding both customer data and the company's operational integrity. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction without a thorough risk assessment fails to acknowledge the severe regulatory and ethical implications. Such an approach would likely violate the principles of data security and integrity enshrined in the GDPR and relevant German telecommunications laws, which mandate appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect personal data. Ethically, it represents a dereliction of duty to protect customer information. Another incorrect approach that involves deferring all cybersecurity updates indefinitely, even critical ones, without a clear plan for future remediation, is equally problematic. This demonstrates a disregard for ongoing threats and a failure to maintain a secure operating environment, which is a continuous obligation under regulatory frameworks. It also ignores the principle of continuous improvement in security posture. A third incorrect approach that involves making a decision based on anecdotal evidence or personal opinion, rather than objective data and expert analysis, would be professionally unsound. This bypasses the established processes for risk management and compliance, leading to potentially arbitrary and detrimental decisions that could expose the company to significant legal and financial repercussions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify the core issue and its potential impact. 2. Gather relevant data, including risk assessments, regulatory requirements, and expert opinions. 3. Evaluate the proposed solutions against legal, ethical, and business objectives. 4. Consult with relevant stakeholders, including legal, compliance, and IT security departments. 5. Document the decision-making process and the rationale behind the chosen course of action. 6. Implement the chosen solution and establish mechanisms for ongoing monitoring and review. Question 20. Which approach would be most aligned with best professional practice when Deutsche Telekom is developing a new innovative telecommunications service that has potential implications for data privacy and network security regulations? Option A. Delegate the responsibility for ensuring compliance and security to the engineering team, trusting their technical expertise to identify and address any potential regulatory concerns. Option B. Prioritize rapid development and market launch, with post-launch reviews for compliance and security issues as they arise. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment and regulatory compliance review involving legal, compliance, and security teams throughout the entire development lifecycle, ensuring all identified issues are resolved before launch. Option D. Focus primarily on the technical innovation and user experience, assuming that existing general compliance frameworks will adequately cover any unforeseen regulatory or security challenges. The correct answer is B. Prioritize rapid development and market launch, with post-launch reviews for compliance and security issues as they arise. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a business imperative, launching a new service, and the need for robust risk management and compliance. Deutsche Telekom, as a regulated entity, must ensure that all new services adhere to relevant telecommunications regulations, data protection laws, and internal compliance policies before market introduction. The pressure to be first to market can lead to shortcuts that compromise these critical areas. Careful judgment is required to balance innovation with responsibility. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, phased evaluation process that integrates compliance and risk assessment from the outset. This aligns with the principles of responsible innovation and proactive risk mitigation, which are fundamental in the telecommunications sector. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit and letter of regulatory frameworks that mandate due diligence, consumer protection, and secure data handling. By involving legal, compliance, and security teams early, it ensures that potential regulatory breaches or security vulnerabilities are identified and addressed before they can cause harm or incur penalties. This proactive stance is more cost-effective and reputationally sound than reactive remediation. An incorrect approach that bypasses or significantly delays the involvement of compliance and legal teams is professionally unacceptable. This failure constitutes a direct violation of regulatory obligations that require companies to operate within legal boundaries and to implement adequate risk management systems. Such an approach creates a high probability of non-compliance with data protection laws, e.g., GDPR, if applicable within the exam's jurisdiction, telecommunications service regulations, and consumer rights legislation. It also exposes the company to significant reputational damage, financial penalties, and potential operational disruptions if a non-compliant service is launched. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on technical feasibility without adequately assessing the regulatory and ethical implications is also professionally unsound. While technical innovation is crucial, it cannot exist in a vacuum. Regulatory frameworks are designed to ensure that technological advancements serve societal interests and do not create undue risks. Ignoring these aspects demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility and a disregard for the broader impact of the company's operations. This can lead to services that are technically functional but legally or ethically problematic, resulting in similar negative consequences as the first incorrect approach. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk-based approach. This begins with identifying all relevant regulatory obligations and internal policies. Then, a comprehensive assessment of potential risks associated with the new service should be conducted, encompassing legal, compliance, security, and ethical dimensions. Cross-functional teams, including representatives from legal, compliance, IT security, product development, and business units, should collaborate throughout the development lifecycle. A clear governance framework with defined approval gates for each phase of development and deployment, particularly before launch, is essential. This ensures that all critical checks and balances are in place, fostering a culture of compliance and responsible innovation.